Hello, my name is Parm King, and I am the developer of the Destiny RPG game. This is my first video, and I thought I would go through the philosophy of the game, why I created the game, some history about role playing and wargaming, to give you a core concept and understanding what this game's about. My story actually begins 35 years ago in a small town, and I was in high school at the time, and my friend Ben, we were both in theater, and we were both in a Nabokov play, if I remember correctly. Anyway, after school one day, he said, "You want to come to the library? I got a new game, and I think you're going to enjoy it." And I said, "Sure, sure." And we go to the library, and of course, we know what that game is. It's Dungeons and Dragons. And he has this box and some books, and he opens up this screen, and there's these dice, these strange looking dice, and we talk about role playing. And he gives me this piece of paper, and I have to roll some dice to determine my strength and my dexterity, and if I'm smart or dumb. And I decided to be a thief. I remember I have 3 hit points, and I don't last that long in the first session. But I'm excited. I didn't mind that my character died. I was just really caught up in the story. And Ben was, being in theater and being a good role player, he really got us engaged, and it was just an amazing time. So I ran out and bought the basic box set. And of course, when you get the basic box set, you have these dice, and they have the etchings of the numbers in it, but there's no actual color in there. And so they give you a white crayon, and you have to kind of rub that crayon in there good, and then wipe off the excess so that you can see and read the numbers. And of course, I rush out and I buy the player handbook. And I remember the adventurers they're crawling up on the top of the statue. That's like a horned statue, and they're prying out this red ruby eye, and there's some dead like lizard man, and someone's cleaning or sharpening a sword. And I've stared at this cover hours of my life, just dreaming and waiting for that next session to play with Ben. And of course, we played all kinds of modules. And we played Ravenloft, we played Tomb of Four, we played another one with a pharaoh, I believe, in it. And we came up even with our own adventures. I had DM'd a couple of games. And then, life happens, and you graduate high school and you go off, and some people join the Navy, which is what I did. And you forget about it. You remember the good times, but you forget about Dungeons and Dragons, or at least I did. And we recently, everyone on the planet, unfortunately, has been under a difficult situation with this lockdown and this virus. And I was in a new city, and I had this dream, and I remembered playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friend Ben, and remembering a particular battle. We were going through this tunnel, and we sprung a trap. We didn't detect it. One of the players got hit with a poison dart, and all of a sudden we're engaged in combat. And I just remember that particular combat really well. And I remember we spent time figuring out, less about the combat, but figuring out how we were going to survive this. Talking and creative problem solving. It was so much fun, and that memory will be with me for the rest of my life. And I thought, hey, you know what? I'll get on the internet. We didn't have an internet back then. And I remember there were some things that always bothered me when Ben and I were playing. There was one time where we had come out of the dungeon, and we were barely surviving. We started camping, and we were issued our experience points. And Ben had issued the experience, and one of our players leveled. It was a magic user. I forget which kind of magic user. The magic user leveled, and as soon as he did, he started going through his book and picking spells out. And I'm still thinking I'm in this, this character we're camping. I'm thinking to myself, Ben, how is this guy learning all these spells? We're in the middle of the woods. Someone teaching him what's going on. And Ben, did the best he could to fit it into the context of the game and the scenarios. Like, well, he had been studying new spells for years, and he just finally, he came up with some kind of. I think Ben did a great attempt, but to make sense of this kind of completely out of context situation. I remember Ben and I had another conversation, and I was just wrestling and having a difficulty with armor class. And part of this wasn't Dungeons and Dragons so much, is part of my upbringing. My grandfather was a big influence on raising me, and he was an engineer. And he instilled upon me, it's like one of the most important questions to always ask is why? Why does something happen? And if you don't understand the why, then you won't be able to solve the problem. You won't have enough data and information to come up with a creative solution to solve the problem. So the why question is vitally important. Why does this thing happen? Why is this occurring? And collecting that data, I guess in some respects, sort of like a detective. You go there and you see all this information, evidence, and stuff, and you collect together to surmise what had happened. How did maybe this individual or detective had died, or there was a murder, or something was stolen. And so I kept on asking the why question, and I think Ben was also kind of suffering from this. Well, this is the rule, and we never answered those questions. And again, this is the pre-internet era in the 80s, and we just loved the game so much we just continued to play. Well, as I was saying, time moves by. I'm now in this new city. I've rediscovered Dungeons and Dragons Online, and I'm just fascinated. There are these people videotaping themselves playing for hours. Critical Role, which is this huge success. I've watched several of those episodes. I'm completely impressed, and there's this resurgence going on. So I've got to jump back in, and I want to read all about it. But I realized something's happened. I left Dungeons and Dragons in the early 1980s. I think I played my last game, must have been 86, must have been 1986. And so there's second edition, third edition, fourth edition, and now all of a sudden we're in fifth edition. So I've missed 2, 3, and 4, and I got to jump into 5. And so I download the fifth edition, and I'm reading through the rules, and I notice something again. It's frustrating. And what I noticed this time is I come back to the why question. I'm a level 1 player. How come I get all these hit points? How come I'm almost like a superhero? And it reminds me of those questions I was asking Ben so long ago about spell casting or learning spells and armor class. And it reminds me of a Kipling quote in which he said, if anyone questions why we died, we just tell them because our fathers lied. I always found Kipling, I like sardonic humor and satire, Voltaire, and I think Kipling is a little bit more subtle, but you get the point. And Gygax later makes a quote, which makes a lot of sense to me. But I started asking the why question. I realized something that was happening. There was a paradigm shift that happened since when I was playing to 5. So from AD&D, there was 2, 3, 4, and then in 5, something happened. And 2 things happened. One is we had these online games, and where you progress from killing stuff. You just go out there and you're chopping stuff up, and every time you killed something, you got more experience. It was you were leveling based on the amount of kills you had. In the old Dungeons and Dragons, when I played it, it was less about the killing of the creatures, but trying to acquire the treasure or the relic or the loot. And the experience points, more experience points was awarded to the loot than it was to killing. The second thing was these superhero movies, which are great, and I like superhero movies as much as the next person, but they've become widely popular in the DC, the Marvel universe, and all these movies. And so together you have this online gaming about just, technically hero murder hobos. And they're great games, World of Warcraft, and all these other games, online games. But technically, you're hero murder hobos. And when I roll up my first character, I ended up wanting to play online. My first online experience was using Fantasy Grounds, which is a great platform. I played a couple games on there, but my characters, I was just shocked about how powerful my level 1 character was, how many hit points I had, and all this power, access to spells, and armor classes that were just insane. In one game, there was somebody with leather armor, and I think they had a 19 or 20 armor class, and I'm thinking, you're level 1, how like you couldn't imagine that way back when. And so I was thinking back to when I was a character, and I was just this little kind of hobbit thief that died with three hit points. So I wanted to ask the question. I've played a couple of games on Fantasy Ground. I discovered Foundry on Virtual Tabletop, which is bar none probably the best online platform for playing, in my opinion, for playing games, the Dungeons and Dragons Foundry. And so I started playing some games on Foundry, but I went back to those why questions. Why do we have this and why do we have that? And armor class was really bothering me, especially seeing players at level 1 with 19 armor class. And where did it come from? Well, it started with Gary Gygax. And Gary Gygax, who's, I guess you could call him the grandfather of Dungeons and Dragons, creating Dungeons and Dragons, didn't start off as a role-playing game, actually. It started off as a war game. And it didn't start off with Gary Gygax. It started off a long time prior to Gary Gygax with H.G. Wells. So H.G. Wells, who was a famous author, had written a book called Little Wars, which was a rule book for wargaming with toy soldiers. In fact, I remember hearing that, or reading somewhere that Robert Louis Stevenson, even before this book, another famous author, was playing war games with miniature soldiers, mostly like the Prussian War and historical battles. Gary Gygax was a big wargaming player and had actually written rules and updated some of these rules to write a modern war game. Now, war games and RPGs are significantly different from two core concepts. One, role-playing, you're an individual character, and there's a lot of interactions and communications with NPCs, and a lot of it is communications and as the name implies, role-playing. Whereas wargaming is you're commanding battalions or companies or brigades of troops, perhaps tanks, perhaps ships. I played a lot of war games. Most of mine were World War II, but I remember punching out thousands of those little cardboard chits. I played Eastern Front, Coruscant Pocket, North Africa, Panzer units. But all the rules and mechanics in wargaming made a lot of sense. You had armor class, and you had distance, movement, terrain effects, and it was all the whole point of wargaming was getting yourself in a strategic and tactical advantage in order to take the optimum situation for maximizing your firepower and delivering your weapon payload to obliterate the enemy, and making sure you're in an advantaged position in which you're maximizing your defensive position to reduce casualties. And it is a great gaming system, the various war gamings, whether it's World War II or Civil War, Napoleonic or Prussian Wars. But it's not role-playing. And so what Gygax had done is he had created a game called Chainmail. And it was rules for medieval miniatures by Gygax and another gentleman. And it was adopting the wargaming with some slight role-playing. It wasn't a role-playing game. It was still a war game, but he introduced some fantasy characters into it. And it's the first time the word armor class comes up. And the armor class basic rule is similar to the wargaming rule. So if you imagine, you're a tank, for instance, or a paladin knight with a certain level of armor, you have a certain level of armor class, and you're rolling not only to hit that armor, but kind of affect damage on it. And so a lot of the rules that were brought into Dungeons and Dragons came from these early war games, and a lot of them in which Gygax had modernized, so to speak, and came up with his own chainmail wargaming. And that brought about Dungeons and Dragons as we have it today. So I began to understand the why question. The mechanics in Dungeons and Dragons when I first played it were a lot of them that were adopted from what Gygax knew in designing war games, and they made sense at the time because they were a mechanic being used in the initial Dungeons and Dragons and chainmail, which was medieval knights battling and getting it down to the individual kind of skirmish level and adopting those rules to a skirmish level. So the first iteration of Dungeons and Dragons was kind of this taking wargamings down to the granular level of skirmish battles, and those rules were adopted. But why do they exist to this day is the second question I ask myself. And I realize that question, understanding basic business. Anyway, in business you have what's known as legacy and stickiness. And remember, Dungeons & Dragons started off with Gygax and a company, TSR, which was purchased by Wizard of the Coast, which was purchased by a public company named Hasbro. So Dungeons & Dragons is owned by the Hasbro Corporation, which owns the subsidiary Wizard of the Coast. And when you purchase another company and it has a bunch of clients, it's known as you're purchasing a legacy of the business. And you have a stickiness, and the stickiness is clients don't like change. So you have a group of people that are using your particular product, they enjoy using your product, they're repurchasing your product. You don't want to change it too much because you might be afraid of losing your legacy business. And people become used to something. People do not like change. And that's why New Coke failed. When Coca-Cola came out with New Coke, it was a horrible failure. And so Wizard of the Coast has this legacy system in which if they make too many radical changes to the core rules system, which people have been playing for over 30 years, they're going to get a lot of pushback and they might lose some players. And we kind of saw that deviation happen after version 3.5 to go to 4, and they issued out that OGL game license, and Pathfinder kind of spun off and become radically popular because there was a bunch of people that didn't want change. They liked the system as it was, maybe some changes that were more homogeneous to the existing system. And anytime you're going to deviate from a core legacy system, you're going to have pushback, and you don't want to lose that. And so from a business perspective, I understand Hasbro and Wizard of the Coast situations. They need to continue to update and grow the platform, but at the same time, they can't make any completely radical changes that are going to hamper or lose business. Now, Wizard of the Coast has done a phenomenal job. I played games on Fantasy Grounds and then Foundry, as I mentioned, and the next thing I did is I jumped in and I played, and I decided to DM. And I ended up jumping in to a game that I played before, the Ravenloft module, and I purchased Curse of Strahd, and I was blown away. Wizard of the Coast did an amazing job taking this module that I had played and kind of expanded the story, expanded the universe, and added all this great stuff in it. And I believe the last name was Hickman initially did this module, and it's Gothic horror at its best, and it's amazing. So I read through the Curse of Strahd cover to cover, actually online, so page 1 to whatever the end page, But I realized going online, so many people have played this. So many people know it. Players, dungeon masters, people just reading about it. There's Reddit posters, everything. So I went in and started rewriting a lot of this to refresh it. And as I did, I decided, well, there's these core mechanics in Dungeons and Dragons that I had issues with, as I mentioned. Armor class, spells, learning spells. And so I decided to come up with some house rules. And the house rules were rules to simplify some of the gameplay and to bring some context to the game. And I think some of the house rules were very good, and they're kind of the foundation to the Destiny role-playing game. And we're currently in our Curse of Strahd campaign, playing it with our house rules. And I decided to use these house rules to write a role-playing game based off the OGL license, but bring an element to it that hasn't been done before. When I started researching to be the dungeon master of Curse of Strahd, and instead of just writing some rules haphazardly, house rules, I did a lot of research. I purchased 3 different rule books that are, I think they're called original, they're like OGRs or OCRs, and they're really referencing the original Dungeons & Dragons. There's some good ones I read and purchased, Hardcore 5e, and a few other ones, who kind of harken back to that older Dungeons and Dragons era, making it more deadlier, less superhero-ish. But there's a huge difference between simplifying something and also creating efficiency. And I go back to my grandfather, the engineer, and he said something to me, and it really stuck. And it's something that I've applied to different things that I've done throughout my life, and it's called an eloquent solution, elegance. And elegance, we equate elegance a lot to beauty, and that's what it is. But there is elegant solutions in mathematics and in science, and what it is, it's the effectiveness and the simplicity and efficiency all kind of bound together to a point where it's beautiful. It makes sense. It's in its most simplistic, efficient, effective form. You can see this in Pythagorean's theorem. You can see this, in the golden ratio, and these are just these eloquent systems that exist in math and in science. And so I wanted to apply this approach of elegance to the role-playing system. And so how did I do that? Well, the problem that I was having, if we look back, is what I was asking Ben at the time was the why question. I wanted to know the why, and I figured out what the why was a lot of these rules and mechanics had come from wargaming, and they were kind of twisted and pushed into a role-playing mechanic without bringing context to it in role-playing. So what became really important to the rules that I was working on was creating context to the rules, making sure the rules fit within the storytelling and within the narrative. And so that's when I got to start thinking about eloquent solutions for role-playing. And so I went through every single rule, armor class, the attack roll, spell casting, learning spells, the experience, and not just simplify them, not make them more efficient, but apply this eloquent solution approach. And I didn't want to do what other role-playing games have done, and effectively, if you look at Warhammer Fantasy or RuneQuest, which I've purchased and read through those, they get more into granular detail. They believe more is better and more detail, and that's great. If you want a lot of detail, those are great systems. But I wanted to keep the simplicity and the efficiency that D&D 5e has, but bring an eloquent solution to it. And I believe I've achieved that. So the core rules at this point are written. The spell class, the armor class, not the spell class, the spell casting, learning spells, the armor class, the combat, even creating characters. The other thing I wanted to incorporate into the Destiny RPG is making sure that all the context in which you're creating a character, leveling a character, experiencing a character, fit within this story and the narrative, so that the game master can incorporate your character, because it's really about you, it's about the characters, incorporate you more into the story. So you just don't level and pick spells. That doesn't happen in Destiny RPG. You have to earn your level, and not earn it just through experience points. There might be some requirements, and those requirements can be folded into the story and into the narrative. You don't automatically learn spells. In fact, players don't know what the spells are. They have to venture forth and journey out there and explore to discover spells. And the spells don't always work as expected. The experience system makes sense in the fact that when players come to the table with the Game Master, the Game Master can set expectations of what the player is going to earn playing in that particular session. And it's not more complicated. In fact, I would say it's far more, I guess the right word would be elegant. So I have finished the draft of the core rules is complete. I'm about 50-60% done with the Game Master's book. And I hope to have this released, a final version released. My due date is going to be the fourth quarter, but I think I'll have it released before then, because I've moved fairly quickly in getting this done. So that kind of gives you the philosophy of what this is, a little bit of history about me and my experience, why I've done this. If you're interested in this, let me know. Go ahead and send a message here, leave a comment below. I'm putting together a Patreon page, which I don't have done yet, but it'll be done soon. If you're interested in playtesting or learning about the rules, please let me know. Please comment below. I welcome your comments, thoughts, criticisms, solutions. I'm excited about this. My players, I've got players that are ready to play test it, which I hope to be doing shortly. So that kind of gives you the background of Destiny RPG. I hope you enjoyed this video. Click like if you did, and I'll be posting a video once a week talking specifically about a particular rule and the rule mechanic and the eloquent solution that I've applied to that particular rule mechanic. So thanks very much, and I hope to see you soon here on my channel. Please subscribe, please hit the like button. I'm a newbie at this. This is my first video, so if you have any suggestions that I can improve it, I'm humble enough. I'll listen. Let me know. Thanks again, and I look forward to the next video, and may all your rolls be 20s.